The desert was quiet, too quiet for a man who had not slept in years. Taza rode alone beneath a sky the color of dying embers, his black hair flying behind him like a banner of shadows. He was young, no more than 28, but his eyes looked far older, cracked by exhaustion, sharpened by years of refusing to close them for more than a few moments at a time. The Apache people called him Nedali, the man hunted by his own dreams, but no one knew the truth as he did. Sleep was not rest for him. It was a battlefield. Every sunset, a familiar dread tightened in his chest. Every night, the same nightmare waited like a coiled rattlesnake. He had survived a massacre as a child, one he had no power to stop, one he could never forget. Flames, screams, blood on stone. His mother calling his name. And the face of a cowboy with a scar across his jaw, smiling cruelly before swinging his rifle. Whenever Taza slept, he returned to that moment. Over and over. Again and again. So he simply stopped sleeping. At first, his tribe tried to help him. Medicine men burned sage until the air thickened. Elders sang old songs meant to guide restless spirits. Women brought him sweet cactus wine to calm his racing heart. Nothing worked. Hours of sleep became minutes. Minutes became seconds. Then even those seconds vanished. Taza grew stronger in body and weaker in spirit. His horses obeyed him. Warriors respected him. But inside, he felt like a man walking the edge of a cliff. A person cannot go years without sleep, not fully, not safely. Yet Taza forced himself to do exactly that. The alternative, to fall into the abyss of dreams, felt like a place he might never return from. One cold morning, when the sun was nothing more than a pale coin in the sky, Taza's legs gave out beneath him. He fell to one knee, panting, gripping the neck of his horse as dizziness swept over him like a wave. His uncle, a stern warrior named Koda, found him kneeling there. With worry hidden behind a mask of stone, the older man said, "You cannot live like this, Taza. Even the greatest warrior needs rest." Taza lifted his head, jaw clenched. "I cannot sleep," he answered. "The spirits chase me when I close my eyes." Koda studied him for a long moment, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then you must find someone living to help you. Someone whose presence scares away the spirits." Taza almost laughed. Who would sleep beside a man cursed? But Koda did not smile. "You must go where no one knows your past. A town where your name means nothing. Pay someone to stay beside you. A body brings warmth. Warmth brings safety. And safety brings sleep." Taza resisted the idea. He was a proud man, unaccustomed to asking for help, especially from strangers. But he knew he was losing this battle. Every day his mind grew foggier. Every night his heart beat faster with fear. The world had become too loud, too bright, too heavy. And so, when evening settled over the land and the first star appeared, Taza turned his horse toward the white man's town called Redstone. It sat at the edge of the territory, dusty and loud, filled with gamblers, cowboys, drunks, and wandering souls, all seeking something. As Taza approached the town, people stared at him, some with curiosity, others with fear. An Apache riding alone was rare. One with a face carved by exhaustion was stranger still. He ignored their whispers, tied his horse to a post outside the Redstone Hotel, and stepped inside. The air smelled of whiskey and old wood. Behind the counter, the hotel manager, a plump man with shiny spectacles, froze at the sight of him. Taza spoke plainly. "I need a room," he said. Then, after a long pause, "and someone to sleep beside me." The manager blinked, stunned. "Sleep beside you?" Taza nodded once. "I will pay." And so began the search for the woman who would change everything. A woman who did not yet know that her Presence could quiet the nightmares of a man who had not slept in years, a woman named Evelyn. Evelyn Hart had learned early in life that no one rescued a poor girl. She folded sheets, scrubbed floors, and carried water up and down 3 flights of stairs at the Redstone Hotel from dawn till midnight. Her hands were always raw. Her back always ached. Her fingers were permanently wrinkled from soapy water. But she never complained, because complaining didn't feed a sick mother or keep a roof over their heads. Every morning before her shift, she'd tuck a few curls behind her ear, hide them under a kerchief, and check on her mother, who lay coughing in their tiny rented room across town. The doctor had said she needed medicine far too expensive for a maid making pennies. So Evelyn worked. And worked. And worked. She had no dreams, no men calling on her, no pretty dresses to wear to church. Just long hours, aching bones, and a heart trained to stay quiet. Until the day an Apache walked into the hotel. The manager burst into the laundry room that afternoon, wiping sweat from his forehead and looking both confused and delighted, the way he always did when money was involved. "Evelyn," he said breathlessly, "I have a job for you." She straightened from the ironing table, suspicion rising instantly. The manager was not a kind man. He did not assign jobs unless they were unpleasant. "What kind of job?" she asked carefully. "One that pays a full $1 a night." $1. Evelyn's breath caught. That was nearly a week's wages. Enough to buy her mother medicine. Enough to buy more wood for winter. Just enough to breathe for once. "Doing what?" she asked, though the tremble in her voice betrayed her hope. The manager hesitated. "It's unusual." Unusual wasn't new to Evelyn. She had cleaned rooms left in disgraceful conditions, carried unconscious drunks to beds, seen worse than most women her age. She squared her shoulders. "Tell me." He leaned closer. "There's an Apache warrior in room 7. He wants someone to sleep beside him." Evelyn's eyes widened. "Sleep beside?" "Yes," the manager said quickly, raising a hand. "Just sleep. Fully clothed. On the other side of the bed. Nothing improper. He says he hasn't slept in years, and having someone near calms his mind." Evelyn shook her head, confused. "Why me?" "Because you're quiet," he said. "Small. Not one to ask many questions. And," he added sheepishly, "you look less likely to run away screaming." Evelyn understood then. Every other maid had refused, but she had her mother to think of. She had rent due in 3 days, and she had no one else in this whole world to help her. Her pulse hammered, but she whispered, "I'll do it." The manager clapped his hands. "Excellent. Go wash up. He'll be expecting you at sundown. And Evelyn, don't anger him. He may be paying, but he looks dangerous." Dangerous. The word lingered as she finished the last of her chores. But it wasn't danger that worried her, it was the unknown. She had never been close to any man before, let alone a warrior with dark eyes and a haunted look. As evening settled outside the hotel windows, Evelyn climbed the steps to room 7. Her hands shook so badly she had to clasp them together. She knocked once. "Enter." A low voice said from inside. She pushed the door open slowly. Taza sat on the edge of the bed, elbows resting on his knees, long hair falling over his shoulders. He didn't look at her immediately. He just breathed slow, heavy breaths like a man trying to steady himself. When he finally lifted his head, Evelyn froze. His eyes were dark, but not cruel. Exhausted, but not empty. And for a heartbeat, she felt something she couldn't name, like he could see straight through her. Past the kerchief, past the plain dress, past the life of struggle she carried on her small shoulders. "You will sleep there," he said, pointing to the far side of the bed. His voice wasn't harsh. More wounded, quiet, lost. Evelyn nodded, unable to speak. She wasn't sure whether she should be afraid, but something in his expression, something tired and lonely, made her heart ache instead of tremble. She laid herself down carefully, staying as far as possible from him, staring at the wall and praying her heartbeat wasn't loud enough to disturb him. It wasn't until the lamp went out that she heard it. Soft exhale. Then another dot and another. The Apache, who hadn't slept in years, was falling asleep because she was there. And Evelyn, lying stiffly beside him, realized the truth. This night was going to change both of their lives forever. Evelyn lay on the edge of the bed like a statue carved from fear and nerves. Her back was straight, her fingers clenched around the thin blanket the way a drowning person might cling to driftwood. The room was silent except for the faint creak of wood settling and the sound of Taza's breathing, slow, heavy, uneven. The air itself felt too thick to inhale. Her whole life, Evelyn had been invisible. A maid, a servant, a whisper in the background. She had never been this close to anyone. She had no idea what to expect from a man like Taza, an Apache warrior, taller and stronger than anyone she'd ever seen, with shoulders shaped like the mountains he came from. But she had agreed. She needed the money. And he needed something too. Something she didn't yet understand. Behind her, the mattress dipped slightly as Taza shifted his weight. The small movement sent panic up her spine. She squeezed her eyes shut, embarrassed by how fast her pulse raced. But he didn't touch her, didn't speak, didn't even move closer. Instead, he inhaled deeply like a man tasting air he wasn't sure he deserved, and let his body relax inch by inch. Minutes passed, then more. The silence grew so heavy she thought she could hear her own heartbeat echoing. Finally, she couldn't stand it. She whispered into the darkness, Do you need anything?" A long pause. "No," Taza murmured. His voice was low, almost gravelly, but calm. "Just sleep." Evelyn nodded even though he couldn't see her. She closed her eyes again and tried to steady her breathing, but the truth was undeniable. She was terrified, not of him, though any woman would be cautious in her place, but of what this moment meant, of lying beside a stranger, of trusting a man she had known for only minutes, of being vulnerable. Across the bed, Taza fought a battle of his own. He kept his eyes closed, but he wasn't asleep, not yet. His entire body felt aware of the girl next to him, not in a wrong or impure way, but in a way that startled him. Her presence changed the air, softened it. He could feel the warmth of her body even from her far edge of the bed. It wasn't the heat that soothed him. It was the simple truth that someone was near. He had forgotten what that felt like. For years, sleep had been an enemy, something that stalked him, cornered him, strangled him. But tonight, the fear didn't arrive as quickly. The shadows didn't feel as sharp. The memories didn't rush in to claim him. He listened to Evelyn's breathing light, nervous, trembling, and incredibly human. Something in his chest eased. But exhaustion does not ask permission. It doesn't wait for courage. Slowly, softly, Taza's mind drifted. His breaths deepened. His muscles loosened. For the first time in nearly a decade, sleep crept over him. But sleep is a fragile thing for a man who has spent years running from it. Barely an hour passed before his body tensed. A soft, strangled sound escaped his throat. The nightmare returned. His fingers curled into the blanket as if gripping reins in a storm. His chest heaved. His breathing turned ragged. In his dream, the gunshot echoed. Flames rose. His mother screamed. And the scarred cowboy rode forward again. Evelyn's eyes snapped open at the sound. At first she froze, unsure what to do. But the way his body trembled, the way he struggled for breath, it cut straight through her fear and landed in her heart. This wasn't a dangerous man. This was a wounded one, Taza? She whispered carefully, turning onto her back. He didn't wake. Taza, she whispered again, louder now. His hand twitched, reaching for something in the dark that wasn't their dot without thinking. Pure instinct, Evelyn reached out and touched his shoulder. The moment her fingertips brushed his skin, something extraordinary happened. The nightmare stilled. His breathing slowed. His muscles softened. His body released a long, uneven exhale, the sound of someone being pulled out of a storm. Evelyn didn't pull her hand back. She kept it there, gentle, steady, warm. And Taza slept. Truly slept. Not for minutes. For hours beside her. Because of her. When dawn broke, a pale gold light slipped into the room, falling across his face. Evelyn stared at him in wonder. He looked different in sleep, softer, younger, unburdened. She could hardly believe she had helped. Then, as if sensing her gaze, his eyes flickered open. He stared at her for a long, deep moment, confused, then surprised, then grateful. "You touched me," he said softly. Evelyn swallowed. "You were hurting." Taza held her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "You saved me," he said. "Tonight, I slept." And Evelyn felt her heart tremble in a way she had never felt in her whole life. Because in that moment, she knew this was no ordinary arrangement. Something had begun between them, something neither of them had expected. Days passed, and the rhythm of their nights together became strangely familiar. Evelyn arrived each evening, quietly preparing the room as if she were entering a sacred space, while Taza waited, eyes shadowed and wary. He never touched her, never demanded attention, only allowed her presence. And yet, both of them felt the subtle, invisible threads weaving between them. At first, Evelyn told herself she was just a maid collecting coins for her mother's medicine. She reminded herself of this every time she brushed his hair back from his forehead or adjusted the blanket over his shoulders. She refused to linger, refused to look too long. She whispered nothing more than polite words, and never spoke of dreams or fears. But with every night, something began to change. She noticed the small ways he depended on her, the way he shifted. Slightly closer when shivering after a nightmare, the faint exhale of relief when she hummed a soft tune from her childhood. The warrior who had once walked through life armored against the world began to let down his guard, inch by inch, as if her quiet courage gave him permission. And Taza noticed her too. It was subtle at first. The way she moved her careful steps. Across the floor, her delicate hands smoothing the rough sheets. The gentle tilt of her head when she looked at him as though seeing straight into the deepest corners of his soul. He had never felt anyone's presence so deeply, and it startled him. Every night, when he closed his eyes, he found himself not alone but accompanied, not by mere flesh and warmth, but by something intangible. Comfort, trust, safety. And yet, there was fear. Taza had survived massacres, betrayal, and the cruelest edges of the world. He had never known kindness from strangers, much less love. He feared attachment. He feared that if he allowed himself to care, he would be shattered. But he could not. Stop noticing Evelyn's small courage, the way she met his gaze without flinching, the way she remained beside him even when he trembled from nightmares. Townfolk began to notice, too. Whispers started at the saloon. "Did you see that Apache, the one who never sleeps? They say he has a maid sleeping beside him every night." Evelyn ignored the gossip. Taza paid no mind. But both could feel it. Lurking in the air like smoke before a wildfire, curiosity, suspicion, perhaps even judgment. And yet, each night, the bond deepened. One evening, as the sunset bled through the window in streaks of gold and crimson, Evelyn noticed a shift in Taza. He had been unusually quiet, staring at the wall, his hands clenched in his lap. Finally, he spoke, voice low, trembling, almost vulnerable. "You are different," he said. You do not fear me." Evelyn's heart caught. She had not intended to make an impression. "I am not afraid," she whispered. "You do not run," he continued. "Even when I shake, even when I scream in my sleep." "You stay," she swallowed. The words hit her harder than any coin he had offered. I stay because—" She hesitated. Could she admit it to herself? Could she admit it to him? "Because you are hurting, and no one should be alone when they hurt." Taza's dark eyes held hers for a long, taut moment. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Not even a whisper. Then, in the quiet of the room, he shifted closer, not touching, just close enough that the warmth of his body brushed hers across the bedspread. It was enough, and that small nearness said more than words ever could. Trust, acceptance, a seed of desire neither of them yet admitted. Night after night, the pattern repeated. Evelyn's gentle presence eased the nightmares. Taza's near silence became less rigid, less defensive. And slowly, imperceptibly, they began to need one another. It was dangerous. Attachment always is. A bond like theirs, built in darkness, born of vulnerability, unspoken but undeniable, could either heal them or destroy them. Evelyn knew that. She risked more than her heart. Taza risked the fragile balance of his life, the fragile peace he had only just begun to claim. And yet, neither could stop. For the first time in years, Taza's nights were calmer. For the first time, Evelyn felt needed, seen, and alive. In the quiet hours before dawn, they lay there, close yet not touching, hearts beating in parallel. And both knew, with unspoken certainty, that the first thread of love had been woven delicate, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. Something had begun, something neither of them could control, something that might just save them both. The first signs of trouble came as whispers in the wind. Taza noticed it before anyone else. The faint sound of hooves in the distance, a scent on the dry desert air he had once known too well. It carried memories he had tried to bury: smoke, gunpowder, blood. The past he had run from, the nightmare he had escaped each night, was riding toward him again. Jasper Creed. Taza had seen the man once as a boy. A cruel, grinning cowboy who had led the attack that left his village in flames. Creed had scars on his jaw like a permanent warning. He survived by taking what wasn't his and killing anyone who got in his way. And now, Taza knew. Creed had tracked him to Redstone. He should have been afraid, but something strange had shifted inside him. For the first time in years, Taza wanted to sleep. Not because the nightmare had left him entirely, but because Evelyn was there. Because she brought warmth, comfort, and something he had almost forgotten. Hope. He rode out in the early evening, scouting the town from a distance. The wind carried the faintest hint of horse sweat and dust. Men were riding toward the horizon, shadows against the setting sun. Taza counted them. 8, maybe 9. Enough to kill if he wasn't careful. Back at the Redstone Hotel, Evelyn sensed the tension even before he returned. She watched him approach from the window, and her heart tightened. He did not smile. His jaw was hard, his eyes alert. Something was coming. Something bad. "Taza?" she asked quietly as he entered the room, removing his coat. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he went to the bed and lay down, careful to stay on his side, leaving space for her. He was tired, but the exhaustion was different now. It was not just sleep-deprived fatigue. It was the burden of knowing danger was near, the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that people he cared for could die. "I can feel them," he said finally, voice low and rough. "Creed and his men. They are coming." Evelyn's hand went to his shoulder instinctively, the way she had done when the nightmare overtook him weeks ago. Her touch was steady, calm, warm. "Then we face it together," she said, for the first time. Taza allowed himself to let someone in, not fully, but enough to realize that her presence strengthened him. He had spent years alone, unafraid of anyone. Now the thought of facing danger without her filled him with dread. That night, sleep was lighter. Every creak of wood, every distant sound of hooves made Taza stir. But instead of panicking, he felt Evelyn's hand brush against his. He felt her presence beside him, a quiet anchor that allowed him to breathe through fear. When the first shots rang out in the pre-dawn dark, the town erupted. Horses whinnied. Men shouted. Wood splintered as bullets tore through the streets. Evelyn clutched Taza's arm instinctively, fear making her small in his shadow. But he did not let go. He rolled from the bed, grabbed his rifle, and stepped toward the door. "You don't have to come," he said, eyes dark. "I'm not leaving you," she replied. Her voice was firm, unwavering. "I've stayed beside you every night. I stay now." Taza paused, startled by her courage. Few women could meet his gaze, let alone follow him into a storm of bullets and fire. But she did. And in that instant, he realized what she meant to him. The Apache warrior who had never slept properly in years now had a reason to fight. Not for honor, not for pride, but for the woman beside him, the one who had quietly healed him, saved him from his own mind, and become a part of his life he could no longer ignore. Outside, the battle began. Creed and his men were ruthless, but Taza had spent his life surviving. He moved like the desert wind, silent and precise, protecting the town, the hotel, and Evelyn at every step. And through it all, Evelyn stayed close. Not in the way a helpless woman clings, but in the way a partner moves beside a man she trusts completely. Her presence, steady and unwavering, made Taza stronger, faster, sharper. For the first time, Taza realized that sleeping beside someone hadn't just saved his nights, it had saved him entirely. When the sun finally broke over the horizon, casting gold across the dust-choked streets, the attackers were gone. Taza stood in the wreckage, his chest heaving. Evelyn ran to him, hands trembling as she gripped his arm. "You're alive," she whispered. "I'm alive," he said, voice low, and for the first time he allowed himself a small, rare smile. "But because you are here." The Apache who hadn't slept in years had found a reason not just to rest, but to live. And the danger was far from over. The storm came suddenly, as if the desert itself was mourning the night's chaos. Rain lashed the windows of the Redstone Hotel, and lightning split the sky with blinding force. The thunder rolled like cannon fire, shaking the timbers of the building. Inside room 7, Taza sat on the edge of the bed, still damp from the early skirmish with Jasper Creed's gang. His clothes were streaked with mud and ash, and his hands were scratched and bleeding from shattered wood and gunmetal. Normally, he would have pushed through exhaustion alone, facing the night as he had for years. But tonight, he was too raw, too human, too haunted by the shadows of his past. Evelyn knelt beside him, damp curls sticking to her forehead. She had cleaned his cuts as best she could and bandaged his hands, but her eyes betrayed worry far deeper than she wanted to admit. "You should rest," she said softly. "You've been through hell." Taza shook his head, voice rough and tight. "I cannot." "Not yet." "Not when." He trailed off, eyes darting toward the window where the rain pelted the streets like icy bullets. "When danger still lingers." Evelyn's hand found his, hesitating only a moment before gripping it firmly. "The danger can wait. Tonight, you sleep, and I am not leaving." He studied her, this tiny, brave woman who had chosen to stay by his side through every nightmare, every gunshot, every trembling hour of sleepless nights. Normally, he would have shrugged off sentimentality, pushed away any warmth or tenderness. But tonight was different. Tonight he could not fight it. Without a word, Evelyn guided him to lie down. He tried to protest, tried to resist, but she was gentle and unwavering, and for the first time in years, he let himself be guided instead of commanding. The storm roared outside, echoing the chaos of his mind. Yet as he lay on the bed, Evelyn pulled him close, wrapping her arms around him. Her warmth pressed against his chest, and he felt something he had not in a decade. Safety. At first, it was only instinct that allowed him to relax. His muscles, tense from years of sleepless vigilance, slowly loosened. The nightmares came at first, visions of fire, screams, the scarred cowboy, but each time they struck, Evelyn's soft whisper or the gentle pressure of her hands anchored him to reality. "You are safe," she murmured. "I am here. You are alive." The words, simple yet profound, did what no medicine, no ritual, no charm had ever done. The tension in his chest unraveled, a knot loosening that had bound him since childhood. His eyes, usually dark and haunted, softened as he realized the truth. He could rest, here, now with her. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the sound of rain and the occasional sigh of the tired warrior. Evelyn stayed close, steady, her presence a tether to a world beyond fear. Taza's breathing deepened, and the nightmares faded into shadows at the edge of his consciousness. When he finally woke, it was the gentle morning light filtering through the soaked windows that roused him. His cheek rested against Evelyn's shoulder, and for a heartbeat, he did not move. He felt the rhythm of her heartbeat against his own, a warmth that made him feel more human than he had in years. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his with a mixture of surprise and tenderness. She had not expected him to let himself sleep so fully, and yet here he was soft, vulnerable, alive. "You?" "Slept," she whispered, almost breathless. Taza's lips curved in the faintest of smiles, the first one she had ever seen. "Because of you," he admitted, voice low and raw. "Because you stayed. Because you cared." Evelyn's fingers brushed a strand of hair from his face, and he leaned into the touch. No words were needed. The intimacy of that embrace, the trust, the vulnerability, they spoke louder than any declaration. For the first time in his life, Taza realized that sleep was not a curse. It was not a battlefield. It could be a sanctuary. And that sanctuary had a name: Evelyn. The storm outside continued, but inside the room there was only warmth, only the quiet rhythm of two hearts beating in tandem. For the first time in years, Taza was truly at peace, and he knew, with unshakable certainty, that he would never be alone again. The first light of dawn crept through the horizon, spilling a pale gold over the town of Redstone. The streets were quiet, the kind of stillness that feels heavier than the loudest chaos. But Taza sensed it immediately, the stirrings of death riding in on the wind. Jasper Creed and his men were back. Far more ruthless than before, their eyes were set on vengeance, their hands already gripping rifles and revolvers that had tasted blood before. They had tracked him, the Apache who hadn't slept in years, to the small town where he had dared to find refuge. Taza did not flinch. Years of surviving nightmares, massacres, and bloodshed had forged him into a man who knew how to face death with precision. Yet something had changed. For the first time, he was not alone. And that thought both strengthened him and filled him with terror. Evelyn stood beside him in the small, dimly lit room of the Redstone Hotel. Her hands gripped his arm, not in fear, but in determination. "We face this together," she said, eyes steady and unwavering. Taza looked at her, astonished. Few men, few women, could meet his gaze and remain unshaken. But she had done more than that. She had entered his nightmares, stayed through his sleepless nights, and given him a reason to fight, not just for life, But for love, the first shots rang out, shattering the fragile dawn. Horses screamed, people shouted, and the air filled with smoke, dust, and the metallic tang of fear. Taza grabbed his rifle, moving with fluid, practiced precision. Evelyn stayed at his side, clutching his arm when needed, retreating when necessary. Her presence a constant reminder of what he was protecting. They emerged into the streets together. Taza moved like the wind-silent, deadly, unyielding. Each shot he fired was calculated, each movement precise. But his eyes constantly flicked to Evelyn. She was not a burden, not a weakness. She was his anchor. And for the first time, he understood that strength could be shared. The townsfolk scattered, some hiding behind crates, some fleeing down alleys. But Jasper Creed pressed forward, a cruel grin on his scarred face, waving a pistol as he shouted insults. His men were merciless, but Taza's resolve was harder. He had survived massacres before, and now he had something worth protecting, someone worth fighting for. Evelyn's voice rang out, clear and strong amidst the chaos. "Taza, behind you!" Her warning saved him from a bullet that would have grazed his shoulder. And in that instant, he realized that she was more than a presence in his nights. She was his partner in life, his shield, his reason to endure. Hours felt like minutes. Gunfire echoed, dust choked the air, and smoke twisted around buildings like ghostly fingers. Taza moved with a deadly rhythm, Evelyn moving beside him with courage he could barely comprehend. They were a team, their bond forged in sleepless nights and quiet trust, now tested under fire. Finally, the last of Creed's men fell back, fleeing into the desert, beaten, humiliated, and afraid. Jasper himself mounted his horse for a retreat, casting one final, venomous glare at Taza. But the Apache warrior, breathing hard, eyes dark and unwavering, let him go. There was no triumph in murder today, only survival, and the knowledge that he had protected what mattered most. The town grew silent again. Only the wind whispered through the streets, carrying the scent of smoke and rain-soaked dust. Taza lowered his rifle, his hands shaking not from fear, but from the release of tension he hadn't realized he'd carried for years. Evelyn ran to him, wrapping her arms around his chest. Her hands were trembling, her cheeks streaked with dust and tears, but her gaze was fierce. "You're alive," she whispered. Taza's hands cupped her face, fingers tracing the line of her jaw as if to make sure she was real. "I'm alive," he replied, voice low, and this time a small, rare smile touched his lips. "Because you stayed. Because you are here." In that moment, standing amidst the ruins of the dawn attack, Taza understood something he had never known. Strength was not just in surviving alone. Strength was in trusting someone enough to let them in, to let them share your battle, your fear, and your heart. For the first time in years, Taza felt the exhaustion of his sleepless nights ebb not because the nightmares were gone, but because he had found something worth protecting, someone worth fighting for. And Evelyn, holding him close, felt the same truth settle in her chest. The man who had never slept, the warrior haunted by his past, had finally found a reason to live fully. Together, they survived the attack at dawn. Together, they had discovered the true power of trust, courage, and love, and the world, for just a moment, seemed a place where they could finally breathe. The town of Redstone was quiet once more. Smoke had cleared from the streets, and the sun rose slowly, casting warm golden light across the wooden facades of shops and homes. The chaos of Jasper Creed's attack was over. For now, the town was safe, and Taza, the Apache warrior who hadn't slept in years, finally allowed himself to breathe. But he did not breathe alone. Evelyn Hart was there beside him. She had stayed the night before, through the storm, through the battle, and now she remained by his side. Her presence was a constant comfort, a tether to the world, to life, and unexpectedly, to love. Taza had spent years running from sleep, from nightmares, from his past. He had carried the weight of tragedy alone, refusing rest because he feared what the darkness might show him. But with Evelyn, he discovered something he had never known: safety, trust, and the ability to surrender. They sat together on the edge of the Redstone Hotel's rooftop, watching the sun rise over the desert. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and sagebrush. Taza held Evelyn's hand in his, their fingers intertwined naturally, as though they had always belonged that way. "You saved me," he said quietly, voice low and full of emotion. "Not just from Creed, not just from my enemies, from myself." Evelyn turned to look at him, her eyes shining in the soft morning light. "I only stayed," she whispered, "because I knew you weren't meant to face this world alone, and because I care." Taza's jaw tightened, and for a moment his face was shadowed by disbelief. No one had ever stayed for him. No one had ever cared, not truly. He had spent so long thinking that life was survival alone, that trust was weakness. But now, sitting beside her, he realized how empty that life had been. Slowly, almost tentatively, he leaned closer. Evelyn did not pull away. Their foreheads touched lightly, a simple gesture of intimacy that spoke more than words could. His hands traced the curve of her shoulders, memorizing every detail, every line of her face. "You are my reason," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Not just to fight, not just to live, to rest, to sleep, to be whole." Evelyn's lips curved in a soft smile, and she leaned into him. "Then rest," she murmured. "Sleep next to me, always. Not because you have to, but because you want to." For the first time in years, Taza allowed himself to close his eyes without fear. The nightmares did not vanish completely, but they no longer held dominion over him. Her warmth, her steady heartbeat, her presence beside him anchored him in reality. And in that anchoring, he found peace. Days turned into weeks. The bond between them grew deeper and stronger. Taza was no longer the haunted, sleepless warrior he had been. He laughed again, if quietly, and began to share stories of his past, some dark, some light, with Evelyn. She listened, never judging, always steady, always there. The townspeople noticed the change in him. The warrior who had once been distant, brooding, untouchable, now smiled. He was no longer alone. He walked beside Evelyn proudly, protecting the town and living openly rather than hiding in the shadow of fear. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mesas, Taza took Evelyn's hands in his once more. "Will you stay with me?" he asked, voice firm but tender. "Not just tonight, but always? Not as a maid, not as someone paid, but as my companion, my partner, my—" He paused, eyes searching hers. "My wife, if you will have me." Tears sprang to Evelyn's eyes, and she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Taza, I'll stay. I'll stay always." From that moment on, Taza's nights were no longer battles. Sleep became a gift, shared with the woman he loved. Together, they faced whatever the world could throw at them. Knowing they had each other, the warrior who hadn't slept in years now lay beside the woman who had healed him, holding her close as dawn painted the sky in colors of hope. And for the first time, truly, he slept, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And in that sleep, there was peace, there was love, and there was the promise of a life they would build together, a life full of trust, warmth, and the quiet certainty that neither would ever be alone again.